The chair was warm. That is the detail that stays with me. The specific, strange detail that I have returned to more times than I can count in the months since that evening. The chair was warm when I sat down in it because someone had been sitting in it moments before I arrived. Had been sitting in it. I understood immediately from the way the table rearranged its attention when I entered. With deliberate intention. The intention was mine. She had sat in my chair on purpose. Her name was Francesca Alderton. She was 41 years old, my husband's sister, a woman who had been performing her dislike of me in the specific key of polished social warfare for the 4 years of our marriage. Never anything nameable. Never anything that could be held up and examined in direct light. Always the thing that operated just below the threshold of what could be addressed. The misplaced invitation. The seating arrangement at family events that placed me at the outer edge of the table. The particular way she spoke about my work in the tone that turned accomplishment into something slightly embarrassing. But taking my chair, taking my actual, reserved, name-carded chair at the table my mother-in-law had organized for our anniversary dinner. Sliding into it as I approached, placing her evening bag on the table in front of it with the territorial deliberateness of someone making a claim. I understood standing there in the doorway of the private dining room of Vaulted, the new establishment that had been the subject of every serious food conversation in the city for the past 8 months. A different category of move, not subtle, not deniable. A message delivered in public, in front of 12 members of my husband's family, that said what years of subtle had been building toward. You don't belong at this table. My name is Eve Whitmore. I am 36 years old, and the evening Francesca Alderton sat in my chair at Vaulted Restaurant is the evening I need to tell you about, because what happened next involves a chef, a document, and the specific way that a woman's face rearranges itself when the room she chose to humiliate someone in turns out to belong to the person she humiliated. I need to tell you about Vaulted first. Vaulted had opened 7 months earlier in a converted bank building in the city's financial district. The original vault still visible behind glass in the main dining room, the architecture of the renovation threading contemporary design through historic bones, with the specific confidence of someone who trusted that beauty did not require choosing between what was old and what was new. The chef was a man named Simon Chow, 43 years old, classically trained in Paris and Hong Kong, returned to the city of his birth with a vision for Chinese-European fusion that the serious food press had received with a particular kind of excitement, reserved for things that arrive fully formed and make everything that came before them seem like preparation. Simon and I had known each other for 11 years, not as friends exactly, as something more precise than friends and less formal than business partners. We had met when I was 25, and he was 32, and I was working at a small restaurant investment consultancy whose principal had assigned me to a due diligence project for a restaurant group Simon was attached to. I had been thorough, and he had been direct about what he found thorough people worth, and the professional relationship had grown into the kind that survives industry changes and years of geographic distance and arrives, after a decade, as something solid and real. When Simon had decided 3 years ago to build Vaulted, he had called me not because I was his only option, because I was the person whose judgment he trusted most about the intersection of vision and viability, the specific question of whether a restaurant that existed in a chef's imagination could exist in the physical world in a form that sustained itself. We had spent 18 months on the answer. The answer was yes, with the right structure. The right structure was a partnership. Simon held the creative control. The kitchen, the menu, the culinary identity of Vaulted were entirely his. I held the business infrastructure, the ownership entity, the financial architecture, the operational framework that allowed his vision to exist sustainably rather than brilliantly and briefly. My name was on the deed. Simon's name was on the door. In the hospitality world, these two things were both true and both necessary, and only one of them was visible to the people who came for dinner. My husband's family had made a reservation. They had not done their research. My husband, James, was the third of 4 Alderton children, a kind, perceptive man who had spent his entire life navigating the specific social weather of a family organized around Francesca's precedents, and had developed in that navigation the particular skill of a person who sees clearly and chooses carefully which observations to share and which to hold. He had seen the chair situation before I reached the table. I know because of the expression he wore when I entered the private dining room. Not surprise, which would have meant he was encountering the scene for the first time, but the specific careful neutrality of a man who has seen something he knew was coming and is managing his response to it in real time. He stood up when I came in. He pulled out the chair beside him. A different chair, a chair without my name card, a chair that was perfectly fine and whose adequacy was precisely the point Francesca was making. "Sit here," he said quietly. I looked at him. I looked at Francesca in my chair, her evening bag on the table, her wine glass raised, her attention directed at his aunt across the table with the performed ease of someone who has executed a move and is now demonstrating that the move was nothing. I looked at the 12 Alderton family members arranged around the table. I sat, not in the chair James had offered. In the chair at the corner of the table, slightly removed, slightly outside the main arrangement, the least desirable position at a table for 13. I sat there deliberately, not from defeat. From the specific decision-making of someone who has understood what is happening and has concluded that the response to this particular move is not the one that is expected. Francesca looked over. She had expected me to take the offered chair beside James. The comfortable recovery, the gracious absorption of the insult. My sitting at the corner told her something she had not planned for. It told her I had made a different decision. Dinner proceeded in the way of family occasions organized around an underlying tension that everyone present is pretending not to feel, with conversation that was somewhat louder and somewhat more general than it would have been, without the specific weight of what had happened in the first 3 minutes. The food arrived. This was, I say this without bias, extraordinary. Simon's Kitchen produced, course by course, the specific experience of eating something that has been thought about from every angle and cares deeply about the person receiving it. The service was impeccable. The wine pairings were precise. I ate. I spoke with James's mother, who was seated near me and who had the specific grace of a woman who had been watching her daughter's behavior for 41 years and had long since exhausted her capacity to address it and had arrived at the management strategy of simply being warm to whoever Francesca was currently targeting. I watched the table. Francesca was performing beautifully, hosting the dinner from my chair in the specific way of someone who has taken a position and intends to justify the taking of it through the quality of their occupation. At no point did she look at the corner where I was sitting. At no point did she need to. The message had been sent. The table had received it. The evening was proceeding on the terms she had established, and then Simon came out of his kitchen. Simon Shao did not typically come out of his kitchen during service. This was a known thing among his staff. A preference rooted in his belief that service was an uninterrupted flow, and that the kitchen's contribution to that flow was best protected by the kitchen staying in the kitchen. He had modified this position slightly since Vaulted's opening to accommodate the specific expectations of the restaurant's profile, which occasionally required his presence in the dining room for guests who had come specifically for the experience of meeting the chef. He came out that evening because I had sent him a message, not requesting his presence. I want to be clear about this. I had sent him a message from my corner of the table that said simply, "Dinner is beautiful. The duck is perfect. Thank you for this." This was the message I sent Simon after every meal at Vaulted. A brief, genuine note because I cared about the work and he knew I cared, and the acknowledgement between us was a standing practice that had nothing to do with the evening's particular circumstances. He came out because he came out after every message like this. He came into the private dining room. He looked at the table. He found me immediately, not because I was the easiest person to find, seated at the corner in the least central position, but because Simon Shao had the specific attentiveness of a person who notices what is actually happening in a room rather than what the room is performing. He crossed the dining room. He stopped at the corner. "Eve," he said. The warmth of someone greeting a person whose presence in his restaurant he considered a specific kind of compliment. "Simon," I said, "everything is extraordinary." "You're in the corner," he said, not as observation, as statement of something he was processing. "Change of plan," I said lightly. He looked at the table. He looked at the name card that had been at the head position, my name in the calligraphy that Vaulted's events coordinator had prepared, and at the woman currently occupying the chair beneath it, who had turned at the sound of a voice she recognized as the chef's, and was now looking at Simon with the warmly expectant expression of someone who anticipates being greeted. Simon looked at Francesca. He looked at the name card. He looked at me. Something moved in his expression. Not anger, which was not Simon's register, but the specific quiet of a person who has understood a situation completely and is deciding how to respond with the full weight of what he knows. He reached into the inside pocket of his chef's whites. He produced an envelope. He set it on the table in front of me, at my corner, on the tablecloth beside my dessert fork, with the deliberateness of someone placing something important where it belongs. "I've been meaning to give you this," he said. "The updated ownership documents from the restructure last month. Legal said they needed your signature on the amended deed." He set it to the table not loudly, not theatrically. In the same even direct register he used for everything. The table heard every word. Francesca heard every word. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Simon. "Thank you," I said. "I'll review it tonight." "The corner light isn't good enough for document review," he said with the specific dry warmth of someone who had known me for 11 years. "Come sit at the owner's table when you're ready." He looked at the private dining room, the room I had designed with the renovation architect, whose materials I had approved, whose lighting I had specified, whose every operational detail I had structured from the first conversation 3 years ago. "The owner's table," he said to the room, "is the one she's sitting at, whichever one that happens to be." He excused himself. He returned to his kitchen. The private dining room was absolutely still. I will not describe the 12 faces in detail, because 12 individual descriptions would be excessive, and because the essential information is this. Every person at that table had heard Simon Chow, the chef whose restaurant had been the subject of every serious food conversation in the city for 8 months, refer to me as the owner. Every person at that table had watched him produce an amended deed and place it in front of me at the corner where I had been relegated. And every person at that table, including the woman at the head position in my gam-carded chair, was performing the rapid, internal arithmetic of a scene that had just rearranged everything they thought they understood about the evening. Francesca looked at the envelope. She looked at me. She said nothing. James's mother, to her left, picked up her wine glass with the careful movement of someone finding something to do with her hands, while the room completed its adjustment. James looked at me from across the table with an expression I recognized. Not surprise, not vindication, but the specific quiet of a man who loves his wife and has watched her be patient for a very long time and is sitting in the first moment of the evening that has not required patience. I picked up the envelope. I held it. I did not open it at the table. The documents were already reviewed and signed, a fact that Simon and I had established in a brief exchange before the dinner, but the envelope served its purpose as an object regardless of its contents. I looked at Francesca. "Wonderful restaurant," I said. She looked at the envelope, at the name card, at the corner position she had engineered, at the sequence of the evening that had delivered her, in the span of one chef's appearance, from a position of tactical success to one she had not planned for. "Yes," she said finally. Her voice had the specific flatness of someone operating without the script they had prepared. "Simon has built something extraordinary," I said. "I'm very proud of what this place has become." I said it without heat, without performance. With the simple, genuine warmth of someone speaking about something they care about. Then I picked up my dessert spoon. I finished my dessert. James and I drove home in the quiet of an evening that had contained more than either of us had prepared for. At a red light, he said, "How long has Simon been your partner?" 3 years, I said, "and you never told me," he said. "I told you I was involved in a hospitality investment," I said. "You didn't ask the specifics." He was quiet for a moment. "Vaulted," he said. "The restaurant my mother chose for our anniversary dinner." "Yes," I said. "She chose it because Francesca recommended it," he said. I turned to look at him. "I didn't know that," I said. He was quiet. "Francesca has been going there for 2 months," he said. "She told my mother it was the best restaurant in the city and that she'd been to everything." He paused. "She made the reservation. She chose the private dining room." I sat with this for a moment. Francesca had chosen vaulted. Francesca had recommended vaulted to her mother. Francesca had arranged the private dining room at a restaurant she had no idea belonged, through the business infrastructure I had built with Simon to the woman she had spent 4 years trying to edge out of the table. "She chose the location herself," James said slowly. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for the rest of the drive. At home, in the kitchen, making tea the way we always made tea after a complicated evening, he said, "I should have moved the name card back. When I saw what she'd done, I should have said something." "You stood up," I said. "You offered me the chair next to you." "That wasn't enough," he said. "No," I said. "It wasn't." He looked at his hands. "I've been managing her my whole life," he said, "managing the space between her and everyone she decides to target. And I've been doing it in a way that protects the peace without protecting the person." "Yes," I said. "That ends," he said. "That ended tonight. I want you to know that." I looked at my husband, a kind, perceptive man who had spent his whole life navigating a weather system he had not chosen and had arrived, in the kitchen at 11:15 on an anniversary evening, at the decision that navigation was no longer sufficient. "I know," I said. "The deed," he said. "Can I see it?" I handed him the envelope. He opened it. He read it. He looked up. "You built this," he said. "Simon and I built this," I said. "Yes." He set the deed on the kitchen counter. He looked at me with the expression he had worn across the table, the quiet of a man who had spent the evening watching his wife be patient and has now, on the other side of it, arrived at something he wants to say. "Happy anniversary," he said. I laughed, the real kind. "Happy anniversary," I said. Francesca called 3 days later, not to apologize. I did not expect an apology, and I want to be honest about that. What she offered was something more characteristic of Francesca, which was a recalibration performed under the guise of a different conversation. She called to say she had heard about my involvement with Vaulted, and that she thought it was impressive, and that she hoped the name card thing hadn't been taken the wrong way, because it had simply been about getting the seat with the better view. I listened. I let her finish. I said, Francesca, I appreciate the call. I want you to know that I understood the name card exactly as it was intended. And I want you to know that I will always understand things exactly as they are intended. That's the most useful information I can offer you going forward. A silence. Of course, she said. Good, I said. The restaurant is open Thursday through Sunday. Simon's spring menu starts next week. I'll make sure you're on the list. I hung up. I sat at my desk. Outside the window, the city moved through its morning, indifferent, beautiful, entirely unbothered by the small geometries of power that played out inside its buildings and at its dinner tables. I had built something real, in the years before anyone in that private dining room had known to look, in the margins and the evenings and the patient, deliberate accumulation of a vision that had been mine and Simon's and no one else's. And when the room had finally looked, it had looked at the corner first. That was, I decided, exactly right. The best things usually start at the corner. Before you go, I need your honest answer in the comments right now. Was Simon's move with the deed the most satisfying thing you've ever heard? Or do you think Eve should have revealed the ownership herself without waiting for Simon? Tell me exactly which side you're on. I read every single comment, and this one is going to divide the room. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever been seated at the corner of a table that was supposed to have your name on it, hit that like button right now, so this story reaches every person who needs it today. Share it with someone who has been made to feel like a corner person by someone who didn't know what they were building. And if you believe that the rooms worth being in are the ones you build yourself, subscribe. Because every week this channel brings you the stories of women who were handed the corner seat and ended up owning the building. You do not want to miss what is coming next week. Your first month of Audible is completely free. Over 500,000 titles waiting in the description below. For the corner people, for the patient builders, for the ones who let the room do the talking. The link is right there. Use it today.